This is Mongolia, the 18th largest country in the world, where big states like India's Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, and Uttar Pradesh can easily fit. But despite having such a massive landmass, 99.7% of Mongolia is completely deserted. And this small area is visible. In this 0.03% land area, Mongolia's 100% population lives. In fact, the further a person goes from this circle, the less likely they are to survive. Now, why is this? The reasons behind this are actually quite unique for Mongolia. But what's even more interesting is that this population disparity in Mongolia was not always there. In Mongolia, in the 18th century, the population used to be 10 lakhs. But only one war made 80% of the population, i.e., 8 lakhs out of 10 lakh people, in just a single shot clean up the land. But the terrible fate of Mongolia didn't end here either. After this, Buddhism was born in Mongolia, and Buddhism started spreading. And because of this one religion, the population of Mongolia suddenly began to decrease and never again was able to grow from there. But how can only one religion destroy the population of the country? And that too, a peaceful religion like Buddhism. Well, something strange has happened. Mongolia is now a country, and the history of Mongolia, which we will decode in detail in today's video. And we will also know why there is such a weird population disparity in Mongolia. So let's begin. The first reason behind this is Mongolia's unique geography, which we can basically divide into three major parts. The first is altitude, the second is soil or mud, and the third is rainfall. Now let's understand carefully how 99.7% of Mongolia is deserted because of all these factors, and only this small 0.03% area is inhabited by Mongolia. So first of all, let's start with the high altitude mountains. So if you look at this map carefully, Mongolia is located between Russia and China, towards the northern pole of the Earth. Here, by default, it becomes a part of the polar zone, due to which the atmospheric temperature of this country is mostly in minus. And if you look at this map here, then the northern part of Mongolia, which is this part, and the western part, are completely high altitude areas. I mean, they're surrounded by these mountainous ranges of high height. Now, let's come to all these parts of Mongolia. So the southern and western part of Mongolia is completely empty. Historically, humans have never made their permanent settlement here, because in this area, humans can't even survive the Bactrian camels found in Mongolia. The climate here is so atrocious. So putting things into perspective, all in all, the people of Mongolia don't have a place to live in the western part, nor is the southern or eastern part conducive. In such a situation, only 100% of the Mongolian population lives in this 0.03% small area. Because of these mountains, temperatures in this 0.03% land only increase and become conducive for life. Basically, in Mongolia, the Kufsgul mountain range of northern Mongolia, the Kongai range of the northwest part, and the Kini range of the northeast part make a rough triangle like this. Because of this, these mountain ranges act as a natural wall against the cold wind coming from the northwest from the Serbian wind, and the cold wind coming from the Gobi Desert of the southeast, which is actually a major game changer. Because of these cold winds, where the temperature of the rest of Mongolia is up to minus 50 degrees Celsius. Just guess how much the temperature of this triangular zone would be? Well, just minus 2.9 degrees Celsius on an average. The temperature, of course, is still more for us Indians, but compare that with minus 50 degrees Celsius. And because of this, if you look, the Mongolians have made their capital city Ulaanbaatar in this 4,704 square kilometer area. Now, the second major reason that this 0.03% area is habitable is soil. As I told you, in the whole of Mongolia, because of the 365 days of cold winds, almost the entire country is covered in snow like this. And this phenomenon is called permafrost in the language of geology. Now, just think, when such a thick layer of snow accumulates on the soil, then there will be no question of agriculture on this land. Plus, no kind of infrastructure can be built on this type of soil. And if by chance a land area is saved from ice covering, then there are two problems in that land as well. Firstly, it has this type of chestnut-like brown soil, which has more salination, and secondly, it has more rocky sediments, i.e. soil with small pebbles, which cannot be cultivated. Now let's talk about the third major factor, which is rainfall. So, till now, we have learned that valleys like Ulaanbaatar are very conducive for life in Mongolia. Because firstly, it is geographically blessed, and secondly, the soil quality is also different there. But the third reason is that the third benefit that we get there is that due to the presence of a valley, these mountain ranges also work to stop the wind. And at the same time, when the rain clouds come in Mongolia, then these mountain ranges also stop those clouds in the same region. Due to which, in this Mongolian valley, this type of orographic rainfall occurs. And by the way, the rain here does not happen in the same way as in India. Don't compare that the driest state of India, Rajasthan, also gives a rain of 500 to 1,000 millimeters. Many times less than that. There is only 300 to 400 millimeters of rainfall here. And that is why Mongolia is also generally called a dry desert, in spite of being covered in ice. But due to this rain, the soil here also becomes very fertile. Because you must have read this in geography too, by erosion of the soil from the mountain, all the minerals of the soil often get washed and come down into the valley. And that is why in this region too, the mineral-loaded soil of these three mountain ranges also gets eroded due to the rain and gets concentrated in the valley, due to which the soil of this region becomes very fertile. So overall, if we see, then this rainfall, arable land, and ambient temperature, all these factors together make Ulaanbaatar, situated on the Thulu River, an ideal place for human survival. So, till now we have got a good idea that why is Mongolia so empty and what are the geographical reasons behind it. But the second reason behind the emptiness of 99.7% of Mongolia is also that in Mongolia, in general, the population is very less. But as we discussed in the intro, in history, the population of Mongolia, 80% of the population, was finished in one war, in one shock. And after that, the population growth of Mongolia could never catch up with the speed. So, its story starts from the year 1200, when Mongolia did not look like today. It looked something like this. In this country, the reign of Genghis Khan used to take place, and the people of Mongolia, the kingdom of majestic Mongolia, from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea, and from Russia to Tibet, was so vast. By the way, at this time, in some parts of southern Russia, the Mongolian Empire used to rule. But after the death of Genghis Khan, this whole area was divided into different parts, i.e. into khanates, among which the present-day Mongolia was ruled by the Dzungar dynasty. Now, during this time, it happened that in the reign of Genghis Khan, the common Mongolians had witnessed so many wars that now they only wanted peace. And during this time, coincidentally, Buddhism was also spreading from India to Central Asia. And in the year 1271, it had reached Mongolia. So, in a few years, the Mongolians also started adopting Buddhism. In a way, due to this ideology, the atmosphere of peace in the whole of Mongolia was flooded. But not for very long. In the year 1271, the Qing dynasty entered the world, which was basically the bloodthirsty of the Mongolians. This was because Genghis Khan had once occupied their land and ruled over them. And in any case, he wanted to break the balance with the Mongols. And as we already know, during that time, the Dzungar dynasty was ruling in the present-day Mongolia. So, in 1687, the Qing dynasty, to take revenge, gave the Dzungars an open challenge for a war. They then took a step forward and took over the whole of southeastern Mongolia. So, this was a direct challenge for the Dzungars. So, even though they didn't want to, the Dzungar dynasty had to fight the Qing dynasty. But because the Qing dynasty had come with a lot of preparation and they were fully confident, they defeated the Dzungars in this war. Meaning they defeated them in such a way that in this very war, 80% of the Mongolian population, meaning out of the 10 lakh Mongolians, 8 lakh Mongolians lost their lives. This was a very bad period in Mongolian history, which is still known as 1687 Dzungar genocide. And then, the Qing dynasty completely occupied Mongolia and ruled there for 200 years. Here, we Indians get a very important lesson. In this case of Mongolia, the role of ideologies becomes clear in our society and country. We often consider ideologies, i.e., ideologies, as fixed, that the way it was written in the past should remain the same, like religious ideologies, Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, or Buddhism. We all understand that certain ideologies need to be fixed and established to ensure the progress of our society. But amidst this, we tend to forget one very important truth. That change is the greatest God of all. In fact, change is the only God that spares no one. Whether it's human life, the eventual end of the sun's energy, or even the divine itself. Everything is subject to change. Even the gods worshipped throughout human history have not been immune to this eternal force. Today, who remembers the Egyptian gods, the Aztec gods, or the Roman gods? Deities once worshipped by half the world population? Change has swept them away too. As Indians, we need to understand this deeply. No ideology is permanently right or wrong. An ideology only points us in a certain direction. Whether it's right or wrong depends entirely on the time, place, and circumstances. The real question is, which ideology can make us powerful in today's world? Take Buddhism, for example. It is undoubtedly a beautiful and peaceful ideology. But in the wrong time and context, it led to disastrous consequences. When Mongolia adopted Buddhism, despite having violent and aggressive neighbors, they embraced peace. And this misplaced pacifism led to the massacre of 800,000 Mongolians. As we saw earlier, Buddhist values had a significant influence on Mongolia's history, so much so that large numbers of people were killed. But within just a few years, a new twist emerged in the story of Mongolia. Buddhism, which had already been spreading throughout the region, became even more prominent by the early 20th century. However, this religious dominance led to an unexpected consequence: a steep decline in Mongolia's population. At one point, the situation became so severe that 1 out of every 3 Mongolian men remained unmarried, directly due to Buddhist practices and monastic lifestyles. This was especially alarming because, as we discussed, Mongolia had already lost nearly 80% of its population due to war. The country desperately needed a solution to rebuild its population. It was around this time that the USSR entered the picture, and, surprisingly, turned out to be a blessing in disguise for Mongolia's population crisis. But how exactly did that happen? At first glance, it might seem like the Soviet Union had no reason to get involved in Mongolia. However, the reality was that Mongolia's resources and strategic position offered economic advantages to the USSR. Understanding the historical backdrop makes this clearer. Initially, Mongolia had come under the rule of the Qing dynasty, which defeated the Dzungar dynasty. But Qing rule only lasted until 1921. After that, the Qing faced growing pressure from the rising Soviet Empire, an empire eager to spread socialism to as many countries as possible. Mongolia was next on our list. However, the Soviet Union's immediate target was actually the Qing dynasty itself. To weaken the Qing, both the Soviets and the Chinese supported Mongolian independence movements. The Mongolians, in turn, received diplomatic backing, military aid, and even weapons from the USSR to fight against the Qing dynasty. Eventually, this led to massive protests across Mongolia, protests that grew so large that the Qing dynasty was ultimately driven out. Mongolia was finally liberated, but that liberation came at a price. With Mongolia now free, Soviet influence began to spread rapidly, just as the USSR had planned. However, the Soviets weren't doing this out of goodwill. Their real motivation was economic. This was the peak of the Industrial Revolution, and the USSR needed a reliable source of cheap labor to fuel its industries. Mongolia's population, or what was left of it, became a key resource. To ensure a steady supply of workers, the USSR installed a puppet communist government, known as the Mongolian People's Party, immediately after Mongolia's independence. Because this new government was fully aligned with Soviet interests, it introduced a series of pronatal policies designed to encourage people to have more children. The goal was simple: repopulate Mongolia as quickly as possible, not just for Mongolia's sake, but to create a larger labor force that the USSR could exploit. First of all, they spread such a narrative throughout Mongolia that the most number of children should be given to Mongolian women as a national duty. And the parents who had more children were given maternal glory as a cash fund by the government, and in many cases, a whole house as an incentive. Then, Mongolian mothers were given all expenses paid on vacations just to give birth to children. This is nothing. Can you believe it? There was even a time when the government was taxing unmarried and childless Mongolian citizens just because they should give birth to children. So now, definitely, this step had a huge impact. In just a few years, the Mongolian birth rate started to see a difference of lots of numbers. Also, during this time, with the support of the USSR, health sector and food security also started to improve. This led to a major decrease in infant mortality rates in the country. Now, I know it might sound like the USSR was benefiting the Mongolian population, but the truth is, on one hand, the USSR was making an apparent profit, on the other hand, it was also carrying a dagger on its back. During this time, between 1921 and 1939, the leadership of Joseph Stalin killed thousands of Buddhist monks during the Mongolian rule. Now, in this situation, you might wonder, why was the country getting cheap labor from Mongolia, killing the Buddhist monks who were so peaceful? So, the reason behind this was the cheap labor from Mongolia, which was in danger due to Buddhism. As we discussed, as Buddhism was rapidly spreading in Mongolia, not a single Mongolian was getting married. Now, this thought was against Russia's pronatal, i.e. birth rate increasing policies. And so, Russia started killing Buddhist monks so that Buddhism wouldn't spread in Mongolia and pronatal policies would continue to increase, which would continue to give the USSR its continuous supply of laborers. But then, in 1991, after the disintegration of the USSR, Mongolia started getting relief. Because of this, the Soviet involvement and influence in this country started decreasing. So, this was the whole history of Mongolia. This country, personally, is one of the most unique countries in the world. And its history is also very unique. If you like this geography-related video, then you'll like this video as well, where I've discussed how 80% of Americans live on the east side of this line and the entire west side is deserted. I've also covered this in another video, so you can click here to watch it. See you in the next video. Till then, as always, stay curious and keep growing.